All right, as we move on, we have another guest speaker today. Matt Miles is here. I had the opportunity to meet with Matt the other day, and he had an interesting perspective in regards to the fly ash issue, so I think he would like to share that with us and you folks here today, and we'll have a brief question and answer session when he concludes.
I'd like to address the board to explain some information about the site generally and cover some of the different perspectives, public health, community resources, economic potential. And I don't think those are all conflicting goals. I think there are some really modern options that can satisfy all of those needs at the same time. So, who am I and why should you care? I'm Matt Miles. I'm an ACS certified chemist. That means that I've worked in all 5 branches of chemistry and passed national examinations in each of them. I've done postgraduate research in a wide range of fields around the country. I did water purification for the Army, and I consult for the Civil Response Team, which is a stateside military asset that responds to U.S. chemical threats. And just last month, one of their NCOs won the Army Achievement Medal for a training mission that I planned that showed a weakness in their detection capabilities. That's pretty cool. I developed a hazardous waste recycling technology that won the ACS International Competition for Green Chemistry and Engineering a few years back. I grew up in Morris Hill, and I live in Greendale, so I'm also a member of the community. Let's talk about fly ash a little bit. Best place is to understand what it is. So it's a type of coal combustion residue, which is CCR, so I'm going to be using that one from here forward. Charcoal is mostly carbon, which is a main component of water filters. Fly ash is mostly silica. And carbon and silica behave pretty similarly because they're members of the same group. So they'll grab onto anything they come into contact with when they're in really fine particulate. And so that's why the history of what the ashes come into contact with is so important when you're discussing it, because not all fly ash is the same. That's why we're going to cover a little bit of the site history really quickly. In 1951, the plant was built. So originally, what would happen is when the ash would come out, it would be, sluiced out here and then hosed down over here. And so this was where it was originally collected. This was originally a landfill. It was covered and then re-excavated, years later. This was the main ash pond where it was collected for sometime around the 70s, and it finished out in the early 2000s. So this is where the coal came in. This is what's known as the Gidco site now. They recycled the bottom ash over there. And so this little spot right here in 2005 and 2007, they were planning to re-excavate that and turn that into the present landfill. And that tiny little spot is what everybody has been talking about recently. So in between the different areas, since regulations and science evolved over time, there's a lot of differences between each of these spots. And so here's sort of a view of it. So you can see I've got it highlighted there. And so it's a class 1 landfill, which means that it can only be filled with fly ash, bottom ash, and boiler slag. And so with the rejection from IDEM, that means that it can only be filled with the CCR that's on site. And so their closure plan does include that possibility of excavating other areas to fill it back up. And so it does need filled, not to build on it, but because of flood regulations. So this is from the 1964 flood. These are some various press articles. It was the worst flood since '37, and it actually brought everything from the city dump and the ash pond and dropped it all right on US 50. So after that, there were regulations about how high these things had to be, and for it to be full and level, it has to go up above the 100-year floodplain. So in order to make decisions about the site, it's important to understand the terrain and its subsurface. So for example, although the fly ash pond, which is the one to the northwest of it, and that's the one right behind the main strip on US 50 in Aurora, and that one was built with a clay liner. But in the 1970s, its perimeter burns, which are the hills that come up and make the perimeter, they ran out of clay somewhere else on the site, so they actually excavated those to use those somewhere else. And so they refilled those with bottom ash, which kind of defeated the purpose. But underneath it, you can see there is still the there is still the liner. That's what the fly ash pond looks like currently versus, the main ash pond, which, predates any kind of liners. So some of them have liners, some of them don't. In 2014, TRC did soil cores, and they did soil cores from all around the site. And what it actually shows is that there's fly ash and bottom ash and coal deposits that actually already penetrate all the way down to the aquifer and are sitting on the bedrock in several different areas, especially in the old ash area in Gibco. So the old ash area is, again, that little spot that's right in front of the power plant. So these areas aren't regulated, and so they're unaffected by the closure plan. Important to this is groundwater flow. That's probably the direction that you'd expect groundwater to flow, except that's actually not how it flows. So groundwater actually flows because we draw up so much water, the groundwater actually flows like a drainage bowl into the Aurora and LMS wells. So we see a pretty heavy influence of the Ohio River in our groundwater, and so we have a whole bunch of different testing that happens. The Aurora and LMS test, their annual tests. We have agreements with AEP that test twice a year, and they test just north of their wells. Here is where the three Aurora and LMS wells are, right here. And so here's the fly ash pond in this spot, and then here's the landfill over here. And so AEP tests twice a year for metals mostly, and some basic water quality tests. And then, your municipalities test the CCR once a year. And then over here, Randy didn't have this data until I gave it to him yesterday because it was taken for a different purpose. But these are monitoring wells around the landfill, and those draw up water before and after the landfill to kind of watch for changes. But it's kind of interesting what you find in it. This is from one of the monitoring wells. These are a handful of metals. They have it all broken down into different sheets, so it gives you the general idea. So water testing, it's really finicky, so there tends to be a lot of fluctuation in the results. But you can see, you've got up to like 10 ppm of arsenic, you got about the same vanadium, you got some lead, and all iron isn't on there, but it's about 25 ppm. So those are all pretty high. But what's really interesting is you don't see that in the water. Part of that is because these red lines are the flow of water. You can see anything that comes over here kind of cuts a swath through the whole area. But the groundwater, it comes right from the river. So what you're seeing over here are the same contaminants you see in the river. So that's where a lot of the pretty toxic stuff comes from, not actually from here, but from the river. And so it never shows up in the water. So there's no treatment that happens over here. And there is no possibility to add treatment over there because of the floodplain. So what's possibly happening is that the fly ash pond there is, remember I made the comparison of the carbon and the silica. The reason for that is that it's possible the fly ash pond is actually acting as one giant water filter. And it's also possible that contaminants are being retained in the clay and sort of being diverted around. If that's not the case, you still want to understand why, but if that is the case, there's a limited capacity before that will eventually make its way. So it's a 70-year-old site, and there are things that you want to just shrug and hope for the best about. There are things you want to look at and figure out what is the real case. Because, like I said, there's no real opportunity for addressing contamination. Prevention is pretty much your only strategy for Aurora. So that's pretty important. If anything would show up, if that would be 200 or 200 years from now, because there's never been any testing of the actual content of the ash or the soil to really see, we test the water as it flows. We can see that these things are here, and then they're not, so we don't know where they're winding up. So I think that's an important thing to look at. And I'm also not suggesting that we get hung up on a whole bunch of, complicated testing. I am a scientist. I've worked with a lot of really complicated instruments, but you can have hundreds of pages of lab tests like you do for here, and still really never have an answer. For example, coal miners didn't have any lab equipment. They had a canary, very simple, gave a very simple answer. So it all comes down to answering the question that you're asking. So groundwater, it's expensive to test thoroughly. And contents vary from day to day and point to point, like I kind of explained. So it can be hard to get a really accurate impression. We have nothing showing the composition of the ash or the soil. If anything is going to get in the water, it's going to come from the soil or from the river where you're going to see it in the first place. And so finding out that kind of information is really trivial. So this is a scanning electron microscope image that I did in 2012 of a different kind of ash. You can tell the difference between elements the same way that our eyes look at color. It tells it by the electrons. So it's inexpensive, it's easy, it's not time consuming. You can analyze hundreds of different samples in a day, and there's several universities nearby who would love to collaborate with something like that. Probably at almost no expense, I'm sure. So, options, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to say, here's what could happen, here's information. It's up to you and everyone in the community to decide. So you can stay the course and remain passive observers, which I don't think is the best option, but I can understand there are reasons for that. Nobody wants the port development to slow down, and I don't think that it necessarily would. This is why I've been focusing on easy, fast, simple. The current closure plan is for all those red lines, red squares to basically be covered with liner. And once those are covered with liner, your greatest redevelopment potential is a parking lot. You can cover it with concrete. You can maybe put up a pole barn, but you can't dig, you can't put in a foundation, no infrastructure, no pipes, roads. So, I mean, maybe roads, but you're limited to the surface, you can't go down. It would leave the future wellhead stability kind of uncertain if we don't at least answer the questions of, where is this stuff winding up as it makes its way through the ground? And it would also, I think, have the lowest economic development potential, although it is the quickest turnaround for the site. So direct involvement, there's a lot of different possible routes. Fly ash, as I mentioned, is mostly silica. It's silica with calcium carbonate content and possibly a boron contamination. One is glass, the other is Pyrex, anti-garnet. So that's a really good example of, there are people who want to buy this stuff. In 2015, a lot of power plants shut down. So people are actually paying to go back and excavate these old landfills. So I did the math on it. There's a couple different ways you can arrive at that number, and when I talked to Justin and Jen yesterday, they all kind of shake out about the same. Even if it's half wrong, it's still nothing to sneeze at. So there's about 13.5 million tons of coal combustion residue on the site, and at $3 a ton, which was the 2015 value of fly ash, that's $500 million. So if that's even half wrong, that's still quite a bit. So that's why I'm saying, in the process of cleaning it up, you may be able to completely generate enough economic activity to also solve your other infrastructure issues with roads and sewer and water and everything to that area. And you would also see some of the areas I turned green there, those would not necessarily be no-go zones any longer. Yeah, so we're already doing most of the work of excavating and regrading. Right now it will be accessible. Right now it's pretty much the only time that you'd be able to do it. Once it's covered, it's pretty much off limits. From a public health perspective, from an economic development perspective, I really think that we should at least investigate the potential for looking at other possibilities. And none of this would necessarily change anything about the port, because that little niche in the right-hand square is the currently designated area for the port. Basically, once the site's closed off, it would become a major inconvenience, a regulatory nightmare, and a big expense. But while redevelopment is occurring, I think there's a chance to sort of solve all the problems and create a win for everyone. But in general, that's the big picture. So I'm going to close it with questions.
I actually need to leave to go to another meeting, but I want to make sure I stuck to your presentation. And I've obviously had the opportunity to meet with you privately, Matt, and I really appreciate your information. I mean, it's kind of hard, honestly, for me to absorb all this because there's so much that goes into this stuff. So I think you do, for lack of a better term, do a great job to dumb it down for me so I got a better understanding of that information, and I appreciate your time.
Good deal.